It began on a night drenched in silence, the kind of silence that carries weight, pressing down on every surface until even the air feels complicit. Chief Olu's mansion in Ikoyi was vast, its marble floors polished until they gleamed like glass, its chandeliers dripping with crystals imported from Venice, its walls painted in shades that spoke of old money and measured power. From the outside, the house was asleep, gates locked, lights dimmed, the garden gently stirred by the Lagos night breeze. But inside, in the grand sitting room lined with oil paintings and ancestral masks, a scene was unfolding that would alter the Olu family forever. Teni was sprawled across the cream leather couch, her hair tangled, her breath heavy with desperation. The pungent smell of alcohol lingered in the air, mixed with something sharper, the bitter tang of crushed pills dissolved in whiskey. On the floor, her younger brother lay slumped, unconscious, his head tilted to the side, one hand dangling lifelessly toward the Persian rug. His vulnerability was stark against the backdrop of wealth and refinement. The house was not meant to hold such darkness. It was designed for soirees and charity galas, for laughter and clinking glasses, for the gentle hum of politicians whispering over cognac. Yet tonight, beneath its high ceilings and ornate cornices, shame had found a home. When Chief Olu entered, returning earlier than expected from a late business meeting, his footsteps echoed across the marble like the tolling of a bell. He paused in the doorway of the sitting room, the glow from the chandelier casting his shadow long and severe. His eyes fell first on his son, sprawled unconscious. Then his gaze shifted upward to his daughter, the daughter he had raised with pride, the daughter whose name was spoken in private schools across Lagos as one destined for greatness. The scene before him cleaved his heart in two. That moment, suspended in silence, was the collapse of years of careful parenting, of prayers whispered at dawn, of sacrifices made to preserve honor. The man who had commanded boardrooms and political gatherings with unshakable authority now stood trembling in his own home, undone by the private ruin of his bloodline. It would take years for the family to speak of that night with clarity, and even then, the words were veiled, half swallowed by shame. But in truth, that night was not the beginning of Teni's fall. It was merely the unveiling. The seeds had been sown long before, in the golden years of her childhood, a childhood painted in luxury, but haunted by shadows that no one cared to see. Teni was the first child of Chief Olu and Lady Bizi, a daughter born into comfort, wrapped in silk from the moment she drew breath. The Olus were not just wealthy, they were custodians of influence, their name carrying weight in every corner of Lagos society. Chief Olu, a tall, commanding man with a voice like thunder, had built his empire in oil and construction, carving his fortune out of Nigeria's endless thirst for expansion. Lady Bizi, elegant and meticulous, was known for her charity galas and fashion sense that kept her in the glossy pages of lifestyle magazines. Together, they were a portrait of success, and their firstborn daughter was the crown jewel of their union. From her earliest years, Teni's world was defined by abundance. She attended Corona schools in Lagos, where her lunchboxes brimmed with imported snacks other children could only dream of. Summer meant family vacations in London, Paris, or Dubai, where she walked through toy stores the size of supermarkets, her small hands clutching shopping bags heavier than her frame. Her birthdays were events, not simple gatherings, but full productions with clowns, bouncy castles, magicians, and cakes as tall as she was. Every photograph from those early years showed the same image: a girl adored, wrapped in her parents' pride, wearing clothes her peers would later save months of allowance to buy. She was taught ballet at 5, played the piano at 6, and by 10 was fluent in French. The Olus left nothing undone in their pursuit of excellence for their daughter. But beneath the gilded childhood, there were fissures no one paid attention to. The Olus were busy people. Chief Olu's empire demanded endless travel, endless meetings, endless nights spent poring over contracts. Lady Bizi, though loving, was consumed by appearances. Every social gathering, every charitable luncheon, every committee demanded her presence. Nannies and housekeepers became Teni's true companions, filling her days with supervision but never with intimacy. And then there was the silence around certain things. In a culture where discipline often came in the form of silence and expectation, Teni grew up surrounded by grandeur but starved of conversations that mattered. She was taught to excel, to dazzle, to uphold the family name. But no one taught her how to wrestle with loneliness, or how to tame the ache of curiosity that pulsed stronger with each passing year. By adolescence, those cracks widened. Teni was enrolled in one of Lagos's most prestigious secondary schools, where children of senators, governors, and business magnates formed an exclusive enclave. The air in those classrooms was thick with entitlement. Students arrived in chauffeur-driven cars, their designer bags slung carelessly over their shoulders, their eyes already trained on the limitless possibilities money could buy. In that world, innocence was a fragile thing. Exposure came early and often. At 12, classmates whispered about foreign movies laced with scenes she did not fully understand. By 14, parties were already drifting into dangerous territories, music pulsing in dark rooms, alcohol sneaking its way into the hands of children too young to know its weight. Teni, bright and curious, absorbed it all. She was not yet reckless, but the whispers stirred something in her, a restlessness she could not name. Her parents, believing her protected by wealth and structure, never imagined the subtle education she was receiving outside their gaze. And so, while the Olus boasted of her straight A's and her flawless piano recitals, their daughter was already nurturing an inner hunger, a curiosity that whispered louder each time she was left alone in her room, each time she scrolled through the hidden corners of the internet, each time she wondered why the affection lavished on her by strangers at parties felt more alive than the quiet admiration of her parents. Addiction does not announce itself with a trumpet blast. It arrives quietly, a shadow slipping through the cracks of privilege, whispering promises of escape, of thrill, of satisfaction. For Teni, the seed was planted in her teenage years, long before anyone suspected. The isolation masked by luxury, the curiosity untempered by guidance, the silence of her parents who were too busy preserving appearances, all of it formed fertile soil. Her story would later be told in whispers across Lagos, her name invoked in hushed tones as both a warning and a tragedy. But in those early years she was still just a girl, radiant, intelligent, adored, walking hallways lined with marble, unaware that within her chest, something dangerous was already taking root. The night her father walked into the sitting room and saw her collapse into shame was not the first night her soul had strayed. It was simply the moment the hidden sickness revealed itself for the first time, in a home that had been built to symbolize perfection. The story of how Teni Olu fell, and how she would eventually claw her way back to redemption, begins here, in a house of gold that failed to see the cracks in its foundation. Abuja shimmered beneath the weight of the sun, its wide boulevards lined with freshly planted trees, its architecture gleaming with the ambition of a city designed to impress. For students arriving at Nile University, the capital was a playground, a space both liberating and dangerous, where the children of the powerful converged with the freedom their parents bought them. When Teni arrived at Nile, she was radiant, stepping out of her father's black Range Rover with suitcases bursting with imported clothes, designer perfumes, and the unspoken authority of her surname. She was not an ordinary student. She was Chief Olu's daughter. And in the small, tight circles of privilege that defined private universities in Nigeria, that meant everything. The first months were a blur of adjustment, lectures in air-conditioned halls, the quiet hum of generators ensuring uninterrupted electricity, hostels outfitted like boutique hotels. Unlike her secondary school, here, boundaries stretched thin. Here, young men drove German cars across campus, their exhaust fumes mingling with the perfume of girls stepping out in stilettos. Here, money was not just an advantage, it was the air they breathed. It was also here that Teni found them, the circle of young women who would change her life forever. They were daughters of senators, business moguls, ministers. Girls with braids cascading down their backs, with accents sharpened by years of boarding school in Switzerland and England, with Instagram feeds that glowed with curated perfection. At first, they intimidated Teni. They were louder, freer, bolder. They spoke casually of nights in clubs in London, of private jets whisking them to Dubai for a weekend, of champagne showers in Lekki mansions. And yet, within weeks, she was one of them. It happened naturally, her wardrobe of designer clothes, her subtle beauty, Her father's name all paved the way. They saw in her a mirror of themselves, and she, aching for belonging, stepped into their circle without resistance. Life in that circle was a whirlwind. Classes were an afterthought. Nights were for music that pulsed like a heartbeat, for bottles of Dom Perignon lining tables, for smoke curling upward in dim-lit lounges. Weekends stretched into adventures, drives to Joby Lake, late-night gatherings in Maitama villas, reckless laughter spilling into the dawn. But beneath the glamour was a recklessness that Teni had never known. Her childhood curiosity, the hunger that had lingered since adolescence, found fertile ground here. Every night whispered a new promise: freedom, indulgence, ecstasy. Before Nile, Teni's relationship with sex had been modest, even restrained. She had a boyfriend, Ade, the son of a senator, tall, polished, expected. Their relationship was the kind parents approved of, the kind that fit into the tapestry of prestige. They had shared moments, timid explorations that left her both satisfied and curious. Ade represented safety. He was the kind of young man who sent flowers, who dressed in neatly pressed shirts, who carried the assurance of generational wealth. For Teni, he was a shield against scrutiny, a figure that allowed her parents to believe she was navigating adolescence with dignity. But compared to the storm her new friends carried within them, Ade was quiet, almost dull. While he measured his steps, they leapt. While he spoke of politics and family legacies, they whispered of wild nights and endless bodies. It was only a matter of time before Teni was forced to choose between the world she had known and the world pulling her deeper. The invitation came casually, a weekend in Lagos, just the girls, a private party that promised to be unforgettable. They spoke of it with a glint in their eyes, their voices low, as though the words themselves were dangerous. Teni, caught between curiosity and hesitation, agreed. The flight was chartered, no waiting lines, no airport chaos, just the ease of money smoothing every path. They landed in Lagos on a humid Friday evening, the city alive with horns, voices, and lights that stretched into eternity. Their destination, a mansion in Lekki, perched near the waters, its walls rising high to conceal what lay within. From the outside, it looked like any other wealthy home. Inside, it was a cathedral of excess. Music pounded through hidden speakers, bass vibrating through marble floors. Chandeliers sparkled above a sea of bodies, young men and women swaying, laughing, intoxicated by freedom and wealth. Tables groaned under bottles of champagne and vodka, plates of food ignored in favor of glasses refilled endlessly. At first, Teni floated on the surface of it all, her eyes wide, her heart racing. She clutched a drink, her mind swimming with the novelty of the scene. But as the night deepened, the party shifted. Rooms opened, doors closed, the energy thickened into something primal. Laughter gave way to whispers and whispers to moans. What unfolded was not simply a party. It was an orgy, a deliberate shedding of restraint, a communion of bodies unbound by shame. It was wealth twisted into hedonism, a sanctuary where the children of Nigeria's elite discarded the masks they wore in daylight. Teni froze. Her heart thundered as she watched from the edges, horror and fascination warring within her. This was not the world she had known with Ade. This was raw, unfiltered, terrifying. For a moment, she thought of fleeing, slipping away, calling a cab, escaping back to the safety of her hostel. But Nina, her closest friend in the circle, found her. With laughter that was both tender and cruel, she pulled Teni close, whispering promises that it was all part of the experience, that she would regret missing it, that this was the real initiation into freedom. And so, the line was crossed. That night, something shifted inside Teni. She had not come seeking it, but once tasted, the wildness clung to her like smoke. She left the mansion shaken, her body alive with sensations she could not name, her mind torn between disgust and desire. On the flight back to Abuja, she was silent, staring out the window as the city below shrank into patterns of light. She knew she had stepped into a world she could never unsee. Ade, with his measured love, felt suddenly small, inadequate, suffocating. The wildness had whispered to her, and she knew, with dread and excitement, that she would chase that whisper again. It was the birth of hunger, not gentle curiosity, but a raging fire that demanded to be fed. Back at Nile, Teni was different. Her laughter was louder, her nights longer, her eyes brighter with a restless gleam. Ade noticed. Her friends noticed. Even her lecturers noticed, whispering about the girl who had once been so composed, now always on the edge of distraction. She told herself it was harmless, that she was only exploring, that she was still in control. But deep down she knew. Addiction rarely announces itself loudly. It begins as a whisper, then grows into a roar. For Teni, the whisper had begun in Lekki, in that mansion by the sea, in the night Lagos burned away her innocence. Her descent had only just begun. Addiction does not appear overnight. It creeps, weaving itself through habits until it becomes indistinguishable from the self. For Teni, the hunger that began in Lekki took root quickly, feeding on her wealth, her freedom, and the silence of a family too far away to see what was happening. Back in Abuja, the girl who had once walked through Nile's campus with measured grace was now consumed by restlessness. Her friends noticed it first, how she lingered longer at parties, how her eyes seemed to seek out dark corners, how she returned to the hostel at dawn, her perfume mixed with the scent of other people's sweat. But it was Ade who felt the transformation most violently. In the weeks after Lagos, Teni demanded more from him. What had once been enough, gentle affection, stolen hours of intimacy, was now unbearable in its restraint. She craved intensity, urgency, something raw that Ade could not give. He tried. Out of love, out of pride, out of fear of losing her, he stretched himself. But no matter what he offered, it was never enough. To Teni, every kiss felt shallow, every touch restrained. She wanted him to drown her in passion, to burn her with the same reckless fire she had tasted that night in Lekki. When he faltered, she grew restless, her impatience turning into anger, her anger into cold withdrawal. The breakup came quietly. A phone call. A final attempt from Ade to remind her of who she had once been, of the love they had shared. But to Teni, he had become a symbol of suffocation. She ended it with a shrug, almost indifferent, as though cutting off the son of a senator was as easy as closing a book she had outgrown. It was a decision she would not regret, not then, not in the fever of her addiction. Freed from the boundaries of Ade's restraint, Teni plunged deeper into the hunger. It began with parties, strangers whose names she never learned, faces she barely remembered, bodies that blurred together in darkened rooms. What began as curiosity became compulsion. There was no longer choice. There was only craving. Her days became nights, her nights became voids. Lectures were skipped, assignments ignored. While other students prepared for exams, Teni sought only the next thrill. The hunger no longer cared for names, for appearances, for dignity. Wealth shielded her from consequences. Money smoothed her absences, her parents' influence silenced murmurs, her friends' complicity fed the silence. But addiction is never discreet. It always leaves evidence. It happened in a moment of recklessness that nearly ended everything. The lecturer was young, barely older than the students he taught, a junior staff member trying to climb the academic ladder. His office smelled of old books and dust, the faint hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. For weeks, rumors had swirled about Teni's restlessness, her absence from class, the reckless sparkle in her eye. But it was this, being caught in his office, bodies tangled where they should not have been, that almost tore her life apart. The scandal spread like fire through dry grass. Whispers in lecture halls, mocking laughter in cafeterias, the shame of being reduced to a rumor whispered on campus staircases. Nile University, though elite, was not immune to gossip. Her name became a cautionary tale overnight. Expulsion loomed. The board convened. Disciplinary committees drafted statements. It should have ended her academic career right there. But the Olu name carried weight. Phone calls were made, meetings held in private, agreements whispered behind closed doors. Money exchanged hands, reputations were smoothed, and the scandal disappeared from official records. Teni was spared, but she was not saved. After the scandal, she withdrew further from her family. She stopped returning home during holidays, preferring to remain in Abuja where her freedom could not be questioned. To her parents, the excuse was academic focus. To Teni, it was survival. In the silence of her hostel room, she lay awake at night, her body aching with restlessness. She no longer sought affection or companionship. She sought only to silence the gnawing emptiness inside her, the hunger that no embrace could fill. Friends drifted away, some in judgment, others in pity. Yet a new circle always formed, those willing to indulge, those who found thrill in the recklessness. Her name was no longer spoken with admiration, but with warning. She became both desired and despised, a figure of fascination and caution. The walls of Nile University seemed to close in around her. But she did not slow down. If anything, she accelerated. Every addict believes they are in control, until control is gone. Teni no longer chose her encounters, they chose her. She surrendered to strangers, to nights she could not remember, to faces she did not care to see again. She was consumed not by desire, but by the hollow compulsion to fill an emptiness that only grew wider with each attempt. And though her parents shielded her from public disgrace, they could not protect her from the growing void inside. Every cover-up only deepened her spiral. Every silence only tightened the rope around her neck. The mansion in Ikoyi still stood in glory, but within it, a storm was brewing. The Olus had no idea that their daughter, once their pride, was unraveling in Abuja, piece by piece. The night her father had walked into the sitting room and found shame laid bare had been shocking, yes. But the true collapse, the slow death of innocence, had already happened years before, here in the ivory tower of Nile University, where fire first consumed her. Graduation at Nile University was supposed to be a triumph, the crowning jewel of years of privilege. Families gathered beneath tents pitched against the Abuja sun, cameras flashing, gowns swaying in the breeze. For most, it was a day of pride. For the Olus, it was relief. Teni walked across the stage, diploma in hand, her smile practiced but hollow. Applause echoed, photographs were taken, congratulations exchanged. Few in that crowd knew how fragile her journey had been, how many scandals had been buried, how close she had come to losing everything. For Chief Olu and Lady Bizi, the day was less celebration than exhale, a sigh of survival, a desperate hope that the storm had passed. But storms do not vanish. They return, stronger, darker, when least expected. Back in Lagos, Teni entered a home that glittered with wealth but felt suffocating. The Olu's mansion in Ikoyi had not changed. Its walls still shimmered with imported paint, its corridors echoed with the footsteps of staff, its gardens bloomed under careful hands. But for Teni, it was no longer a palace. It was a prison. In Abuja, she had moved unchecked, slipping into the shadows of clubs, losing herself in anonymous rooms. Back home, her every step was watched. Her parents, aware though not fully understanding of her recklessness, tightened control. They dismissed her excuses, refused her requests for late nights, insisted she remain within the house's gilded cage. But addiction does not respect walls. It began with stolen glances, with boredom heavy in the air, with the restlessness of confinement. The Olu's driver, a young man with eager eyes, became her first target. What began as idle flirtation evolved into reckless indulgence. Hidden in corners of the compound, behind tinted car windows, in the back seat of the vehicle meant to ferry dignitaries, boundaries collapsed. Soon, even that was not enough. The gate man, simple, unassuming, a man whose duties were to open and close the iron gates, became part of her spiral. In the vast mansion of marble and chandeliers, Teni descended into secrecy with the very people her parents paid to guard her life. It was not love. It was not even desire. It was compulsion, raw and consuming, the hunger that had begun years before now finding expression in the most reckless form. The Olus, unaware, entertained guests in their drawing room, hosted dinners, attended parties, all while beneath their own roof their daughters spiraled into disgrace. Secrets do not stay hidden forever. One humid Friday evening, when the sky glowed with the weight of an approaching storm, everything collapsed. Teni, reckless beyond measure, had orchestrated another indulgence. But this time, she was careless. The sound of movement in the sitting room drew attention. The staff were dismissed. And there, in the glow of the chandelier, her parents saw everything laid bare. It was not merely the act itself. It was the symbolism. Their daughter, their pride, their heir, consumed by addiction so powerful it desecrated the very sanctity of their home. For Chief Olu, a man who had silenced scandals in boardrooms and outmaneuvered politicians, the sight was unbearable. For Lady Beezy, who had built her life on elegance and dignity, it was devastation beyond words. The silence that followed was not just shock. It was grief, the death of an image, the crumbling of everything they believed they had built. Whispers spread quickly. Staff dismissed. Doors closed. Calls made. The Olus moved with urgency, not for appearances this time, but for survival. Therapists were summoned. Specialists flown in. Quietly, carefully, without allowing the society pages to catch wind, Teni was placed into programs designed to heal what wealth alone could not. At first, she resisted. The hunger fought back, the cravings raged. But therapy is relentless, peeling back layers of denial, forcing confrontation with wounds buried deep. Slowly, painfully, Teni began to see herself not as a figure of indulgence, but as a young woman broken by silence, by neglect, by an emptiness she had tried to fill with endless encounters. The process was long. Relapses came. Tears flowed. But for the first time, there was no cover-up, no silencing, no smoothing of scandal. For the first time, there was truth. Years later, when the story was told, it was told differently. Not as a scandal, but as a redemption. Teni emerged not as the wild daughter of Chief Olu, but as a woman transformed. She became a voice, soft at first, then stronger, warning young women of the hunger that pretends to be freedom but is only destruction. She spoke of dignity, of restraint, of the silent dangers that wealth conceals. Her story, once whispered in shame, became testimony. The same halls where she had once been mocked now welcomed her as a speaker. The same society that had gossiped now applauded her courage. And though the scars remained, they were no longer chains. They were reminders that even in a mansion of gold, one can be broken, and even from the deepest pit, one can rise. The Olu mansion in Ikoyi still stood, still glittering in the Lagos sun. Guests still came and went, laughter still echoed through its halls, wealth still cloaked its every corner. But within it, silence carried a different weight. Not the silence of shame, but the silence of healing. Teni, once consumed by addiction, now walked those same halls with clarity. Her story had begun with disgrace. But it did not end there. It ended in survival. It ended in dignity. It ended in a young woman who had faced her hunger, fought her demons, and chosen to rise.